Admiral Kexathara stood on the bridge of the Hegemony vessel Orderly Progress, her forearms working across multiple data terminals as she reviewed the latest survey reports. The blue-skinned Zelrani had been in charge of first contact operations for over 20 standard years, and she took pride in her perfect record. Every species encountered had followed the proper procedures, accepted their place in the Galactic Hegemony, and transitioned smoothly into productive member worlds. Today's target was listed in her files as Sol 3, third planet from a yellow star in a quiet arm of the galaxy. The survey drones had been watching this world for 6 months, collecting data on its inhabitants. Kexathara pulled up the assessment report and read through it with her usual methodical approach. Species designation: human. Population approximately 8 billion. Technology level: primitive. Space travel limited to their own moon and nearby planets. Political structure: chaotic. No unified government. Multiple competing nations with different languages, customs, and legal systems. She paused at that last part. Most species had achieved planetary unity long before developing spaceflight. These humans seemed to enjoy arguing with each other about everything. The report listed over 200 separate nations, each with its own laws and leaders. It was almost amusing in its inefficiency. Military assessment: divided forces using chemical propulsion weapons and basic energy systems. No unified command structure. Combat doctrine appears to prioritize individual glory over tactical efficiency. Kexathara shook her head. These humans still fought wars against their own species using primitive weapons. The Hegemony's psychological profile suggested they would be easily overwhelmed by a display of superior organization and technology. Her second-in-command, Protocol Officer Ventar, approached with the standard integration package. The tall gray-skinned Morvani carried a datapad containing all the necessary documentation for a Class C integration. Admiral, the paperwork is complete. Formal notice of territorial acquisition in 847 galactic languages, resource assessment, and taxation guidelines, cultural assimilation timeline, and the standard educational reformation package. Based on their primitive development, we estimate complete compliance within 72 standard hours. Kexathara nodded approvingly. The Hegemony had perfected this process over thousands of years. When a species encountered their vast fleets, detailed legal documentation, and systematic approach to governance, they quickly understood the futility of resistance. The benefits of joining the Hegemony were obvious: advanced technology, interstellar trade, protection from hostile forces, and access to the galaxy's greatest bureaucratic system. Proceed with Standard First Contact Protocol 7, she ordered. Deploy the formal delegation vessel and begin broadcasting the acquisition notice. Schedule the compliance ceremony for 72 hours from initial contact. The delegation ship detached from the main fleet, a gleaming white vessel the size of a small city. Its hull displayed scrolling text in hundreds of languages, officially notifying Earth of its new status as a Hegemony territory. The message was clear and professional. Greetings, inhabitants of Sol 3. Your world has been selected for integration into the Galactic Hegemony. Please review the attached documentation and prepare for orderly transition to Hegemony governance. Compliance is mandatory and beneficial. Resistance is unnecessary and discouraged. On Earth, governments around the world receive the transmission simultaneously. In Washington, Moscow, Beijing, London, and dozens of other capitals, officials stared at screens filled with alien text and legal documents that would take weeks to read completely. The humans' first response confused the Hegemony monitoring teams. Instead of panic or immediate submission, Earth's communication networks exploded with something the aliens had never encountered during first contact: laughter. Within hours, human internet platforms were flooded with jokes about the aliens' formal language. Someone created a meme showing the alien ship with the caption, "When your new landlord sends you a 400-page lease agreement." Another popular image showed a human holding up the alien taxation guidelines with the text, "They want us to pay space taxes but can't even spell Earth correctly in half their languages." President Chen in Beijing held an emergency meeting with her military advisors. General Thompson, visiting from the United States as part of an ongoing joint exercise, couldn't stopped smiling as he read through the alien demands. "They want us to fill out environmental impact forms before we're allowed to resist them," he said, holding up a section of the documentation. "And look at this. They've included a complaint procedure in case we're unsatisfied with our conquest. Experience." "This has to be a joke," said Defense Minister Volkov during his video call from Moscow. "No serious military force would send a formal request to surrender with instructions on how to file appeals." In London, Prime Minister Williams was on a call with world leaders, and the conversation had devolved into reading the most ridiculous parts of the alien paperwork. "Listen to this," she said, barely containing her amusement. Section 847B. Newly acquired species may request alternative work assignments if their traditional occupations conflict with hegemony efficiency standards. Please allow 4 to 6 standard cycles for processing of occupational reassignment applications. The calls were being monitored by hegemony translation systems, and the alien officers were growing increasingly confused by the human response. According to their records, 99.7% of species reacted to first contact with either fear, wonder, or immediate submission. These humans seemed to be treating the most important moment in their planetary history as entertainment. Protocol Officer Ventar approached Admiral Kexathera with a concerned expression. "Admiral, we're receiving responses from the human governments. They appear to be non-compliant." "What do you mean non-compliant? Are they requesting additional documentation? Extended deadlines for review?" "No, Admiral. They've sent what appear to be counteroffers. The nation called Australia has offered to trade us something called Vegemite for our advanced technology. The United States has invited our delegation to what they call a barbecue to discuss terms, and the United Kingdom has formally requested that we queue properly like everyone else." Kexathera stared at the translations in disbelief. In over 2 decades of first contact operations, she had never encountered species that tried to negotiate with superior galactic powers. The concept was so foreign to her experience that she initially assumed the translation systems were malfunctioning. "Run full diagnostics on all translation equipment," she ordered, "and compile a comprehensive report on human communication patterns. There must be some cultural context we're missing." While the hegemony scrambled to understand the human responses, Earth's military leaders were having very different conversations behind closed doors. General Thompson spoke with President Chen over a secure line that had been hastily encrypted against alien monitoring. "The good news is they announced themselves instead of just attacking," he said. "The bad news is they've got technology we can't match in a straight fight." "But they're giving us 3 days to comply," President Chen replied. "That's either incredible arrogance or they genuinely don't understand what they're dealing with." "My money's on arrogance. Look at their demands. They want us to reorganize our entire planetary government according to their efficiency standards. They've never met a species that didn't do exactly what they were told. In underground bunkers around the world, military planners were working around the clock. If these aliens expected humanity to politely surrender according to their paperwork, they were about to learn something about human nature that wasn't included in their survey reports." The 72-hour compliance deadline was still ticking down, but Earth's response was already being prepared. It wouldn't involve filling out forms or attending surrender ceremonies. The galactic hegemony was about to discover that humans had their own protocol for uninvited guests. They didn't follow anyone else's rules. The 72-hour deadline came and went without a single human government formally surrendering. Admiral Kexathera stood before her senior staff, trying to maintain her composure as she read the official responses Earth had sent to the hegemony. "The nation called Denmark has submitted a formal request to see our manager," she said, her voice strained. "The Republic of Ireland has offered to settle the matter with something called a drinking contest, and the Principality of Monaco has demanded we pay parking fees for our ships in their airspace." Protocol Officer Ventar shifted nervously. In his 40 years of service, he had never seen anything like this. "Admiral, perhaps we need to escalate to the Elite Compliance Division. These humans clearly don't understand the seriousness of their situation." Within 6 hours, Bureaucrat General Thissima arrived aboard the massive vessel Systematic Resolution. She brought with her the hegemony's most experienced negotiators, along with expanded documentation packages that had successfully resolved even the most stubborn resistance movements across the galaxy. Thisma was a Korthari, a species known for their absolute dedication to proper procedures. Her pale green skin was marked with the ritual scars of high bureaucratic achievement, and her 6 eyes could process multiple forms simultaneously. She had never failed to bring a non-compliant species into the fold. "The problem is obvious," she announced to the assembled officers. "These humans lack context. They don't understand the benefits of hegemony membership or the consequences of continued resistance. We need to provide them with comprehensive educational materials." The new documentation package was even more impressive than the first. It included detailed environmental impact studies for each type of orbital bombardment, legal precedents from successful integrations dating back 3,000 years, psychological adjustment guides for newly conquered populations, and formal apology, templates that could be customized for various levels of resistance-related property damage. But the humans weren't reading the paperwork. Instead, they were doing something the hegemony had never encountered. They were fighting back in the most disrespectful way possible. Fighter jets from 12 different nations buzzed the alien ships in what appeared to be coordinated harassment. The pilots weren't attacking, they were showboating. Earth's primitive aircraft performed barrel rolls around the advanced alien vessels, while playing loud music that somehow overrode the hegemony's communication frequencies. Commander Sarah Mitchell of the U.S. Air Force led a formation of F-22 Raptors in what she called aggressive greeting maneuvers around the systematic resolution. Her radio was tuned to a classic rock station, and AC/DC's Thunderstruck was broadcasting on all alien communication channels. "This is Commander Mitchell to unknown alien vessel," she announced cheerfully, while executing a perfect loop around their primary sensor array. "Welcome to Earth. Please note that you're currently in violation of multiple international airspace agreements. We're going to need you to file proper flight plans and submit to customs inspection." On the ocean, submarine, commanders were having similar fun. Captain Rodriguez of the USS Virginia surfaced directly beneath one of the alien landing craft, causing it to rock dramatically as his submarine breached like a whale. The aliens aboard were experienced in space combat but had never dealt with underwater attacks that seemed designed more to annoy than to destroy. Meanwhile, Earth's computer experts had declared open season on alien technology. Hacker collectives around the world competed to see who could cause the most creative chaos in hegemony systems. The aliens woke up one morning to find their main communication array broadcasting a continuous loop of cat videos mixed with death metal music. Their environmental sensors had been reprogrammed to detect only pizza and coffee. And somehow, every official hegemony document now ended with, "Have a nice day." In bright Comic Sans font, bureaucrat General Thisma was beside herself with frustration. She had dealt with violent resistance, desperate bargaining, and even species that tried to hide from the hegemony. But she had never encountered beings who treated a formal conquest with such casual disrespect. "They're not taking us seriously," she told her staff during an emergency meeting. "Every diplomatic overture is met with what appears to be mockery. Yesterday they sent us a formal response written entirely in something called emojis." The situation reached a breaking point when the hegemony scheduled a formal surrender ceremony in New York City's Central Park. They expected human leaders to gather in appropriate defeat, ready to sign the necessary transition documents and begin the orderly process of cultural integration. Instead, they found themselves surrounded by the largest block party in human history. Someone had leaked the alien ceremony plans on social media, and within hours, millions of New Yorkers had decided to crash the event. Food trucks lined every street leading to Central Park. Street musicians set up amplifiers that could be heard from orbit. Local businesses handed out free "I Survived the Alien Invasion" t-shirts. The mayor declared it an official city festival and issued permits for everything from face-painting booths to beer gardens. When the hegemony delegation landed at the designated ceremony site, they found themselves in the middle of a carnival atmosphere. Humans were dancing to music that made their translation systems overload. Children were running around with toy ray guns, pretending to be aliens and making pew-pew sounds. Food vendors were selling something called alien burgers, with green buns and tentacle-shaped fries. Thisma stepped out of her ceremonial transport and was immediately surrounded by humans who seemed more curious than afraid. Someone handed her a hot dog and asked if she wanted mustard. A group of teenagers asked to take selfies with her. An elderly woman started explaining how the park's fountain system worked, completely ignoring the fact that Thisma was there to accept Earth's surrender. "Where are your leaders?" Thisma finally managed to ask through her translation device. "Oh, they're around somewhere," replied a man wearing a Welcome to Earth hat while eating cotton candy. "Mayor's probably giving a speech at the main stage. President stuck in traffic. You know how it is." The aliens tried to set up their formal surrender podium but kept being interrupted by people offering them food, asking questions about their technology, and requesting directions to the nearest bathroom facilities. When they finally managed to begin the ceremony, their speech was drowned out by a nearby mariachi band that had been hired for someone's birthday party. Admiral Kexathara watched the chaos from orbit and realized that everything she knew about conquest was wrong. The humans weren't resisting in any way the hegemony could process or respond to. They were simply ignoring the invasion entirely and treating it like some sort of social event. "Sir," called her communications officer, "we're receiving multiple requests from human media outlets asking if our species would like to participate in something called interviews. They want to know about our home planets, our favorite Earth, foods, and whether we're single." Kexathara closed her eyes and tried to remember her training. Somewhere in the vast archives of Hegemony protocol, there had to be a procedure for dealing with species that responded to invasion with hospitality and homework questions. But deep down, she was beginning to suspect that no such procedure existed. The humans weren't following any script the Hegemony had ever encountered. They were improvising, and somehow, their complete lack of proper protocol was more effective than any organized resistance could have been. The worst part was that several of her junior officers were starting to enjoy themselves. She had caught them laughing at human jokes and asking questions about Earth music. One of them had even accepted a human invitation to try something called pizza. If this continued much longer, the Hegemony might face something even worse than human resistance. They might have to admit that their perfect system couldn't handle a species that refused to take them seriously. After 2 weeks of what the Hegemony officially classified as unprecedented administrative difficulties, Bureaucrat General Thisma finally admitted defeat. She filed the necessary forms to request military intervention, though the paperwork took longer than usual because human hackers kept changing her documents to include recipes for banana bread and requests for alien dating advice. High Command approved the escalation with reluctance. Military action required extensive environmental permits, casualty projections, and post-war reconstruction budgets. The Hegemony prided itself on being civilized conquerors who followed all proper procedures, even during warfare. The pacification fleet arrived under the command of War Administrator Zekmoth, a methodical Valthian warrior whose species had evolved from persistence hunters. His people understood that the most effective way to defeat an enemy was through systematic, overwhelming pressure applied according to established military doctrine. Zekmoth reviewed the human assessment reports with growing confusion. According to Hegemony intelligence, humans had no unified military command, no standardized weapons, and no apparent understanding of proper battle formations. Their military forces were scattered across hundreds of different organizations, each with its own uniforms, traditions, and tactical approaches. "This should be straightforward," he told his staff. "We'll demonstrate overwhelming superiority through controlled orbital bombardment of military targets." Standard Pacification Protocol. 12 calls for 3 warning strikes followed by a 48-hour surrender period. The first warning shot was aimed at an abandoned military base in Nevada. The beam struck with precise, calculated force designed to create impressive destruction without significant environmental damage. The blast could be seen from orbit and was carefully timed to occur when no humans were present. The human response was not what anyone expected. Within hours, the impact site was surrounded by thousands of people with cameras, camping equipment, and what appeared to be a festival atmosphere. Someone had set up a gift shop selling eyewitnessed alien destruction merchandise. Local news crews were interviewing random people about their thoughts on alien marksmanship. A group of college students had brought kegs and turned it into a tailgate party. But behind the carnival atmosphere, something much more serious was happening. The humans weren't panicking or surrendering. They were studying the alien weapons, measuring blast patterns, analyzing energy signatures, and sharing the information across their global networks in real time. Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, a physicist from MIT, stood at the edge of the blast crater with a handheld spectrometer. "Directed energy weapon, definitely," she said into her phone. "But look at these scorch patterns. They're trying to minimize collateral damage. These aliens are more worried about environmental impact reports than winning a war." Her analysis was broadcast live on social media and picked up by military commanders worldwide. Within 6 hours, every major government had the same conclusion. The aliens were fighting with one hand tied behind their back, limited by their own bureaucratic procedures. That's when the real human military response began. The hegemony expected organized resistance from professional armies wearing uniforms and following military doctrine. Instead, they discovered that every human was potentially a combatant, and none of them followed any rules the aliens could understand. In rural Texas, shop owner Bill Henderson modified his crop-dusting plane to carry a payload of industrial glue mixed with glitter. He couldn't hurt the alien vessels, but he could cover their sensors with sparkly gunk that took hours to clean off. When asked why he chose glitter, he shrugged and said, "Seemed annoying enough." In suburban Detroit, grandmother Rosa Martinez organized her neighborhood watch program into an intelligence network that tracked alien patrol schedules and shared the information through knitting circle meetings that the aliens never thought to monitor. Her granddaughter posted the updates on TikTok using dance videos that somehow encoded military coordinates. Teenager Marcus Chen in San Francisco built electromagnetic pulse devices from garage door openers and radio parts he bought at hardware stores. His homemade weapons couldn't destroy alien technology, but they could disrupt it long enough for conventional forces to attack. He shared his designs on maker forums, and soon thousands of hobbyists were building their own versions. Retired Marine Sergeant Tom Riley in Montana looked at the alien landing zones and saw tactical opportunities everywhere. He organized hunting clubs into guerrilla units that used deer trails and fishing boats to move undetected around alien positions. When asked about his strategy, he grinned and said, "These space boys never learned to fight in the woods." The aliens found themselves facing an enemy that made no tactical sense. Human soldiers included everyone from professional military units to pizza delivery drivers who happened to know shortcuts through city neighborhoods. Their weapons ranged from advanced fighter jets to modified lawnmowers. Their communication systems used everything from military satellites to ham radio operators who treated the invasion like the world's most exciting emergency drill. War Administrator Zekmoth tried to adapt his strategies to counter human irregularity, but every solution created new problems. When he focused on destroying military bases, civilian engineers rebuilt them overnight using construction equipment and volunteer labor. When he targeted communication systems, humans switched to methods his forces couldn't monitor. Everything from carrier pigeons to messages hidden in online game chats. The breaking point came during what humans called the Great Coordination. It started when a middle school teacher in Ohio named Janet Parker had her students calculate alien patrol routes as a math exercise. She posted the results on the school website, thinking it might be educational. Within hours, that classroom math project had been shared across every social media platform on Earth. Military analysts combined it with data from amateur astronomers, weather enthusiasts, and bird watchers who had been tracking alien movements as a hobby. Scientists added information from radio operators who monitored alien communications. Gamers contributed pattern analysis from their online communities. The result was the most comprehensive intelligence network in human history, created by millions of people who weren't soldiers, but were all contributing to the war effort in their own small ways. When the hegemony launched their next major offensive, they discovered that humans knew exactly where they were going before they got there. Alien forces found themselves walking into perfectly coordinated ambushes that seemed to appear out of nowhere, and then vanish back into the civilian population. In Brazil, alien ground troops surrounded what their sensors indicated was a major military facility. only to discover it was a soccer stadium full of people watching a match. But the stadium was surrounded by food vendors who were actually spotters, ticket scalpers who were forwarding intelligence, and janitors who had placed sensors in every trash can. In Japan, aliens trying to secure a communications array found themselves trapped in a district where every shopkeeper, office worker, and street sweeper was feeding information to a network they couldn't detect or understand. The local population continued their normal activities while simultaneously conducting the most polite military resistance in galactic history. The humans weren't just fighting the Hegemony's forces, they were making them irrelevant. Every alien advantage was countered by human adaptability, creativity, and the strange human tendency to treat serious situations as opportunities for cooperation and innovation. Zekmoth reported to High Command that he was facing something unprecedented, an entire species that fought like warriors without acting like soldiers. They had no respect for military hierarchy, no standardized tactics, and no apparent understanding that wars were supposed to follow recognizable patterns. "They've turned their entire civilization into a weapon," he wrote in his official report. "But it's not a weapon we know how to fight. They're not trying to defeat us in battle, they're trying to make it impossible for us to win." For the first time in Hegemony history, a pacification fleet was requesting additional resources not because the enemy was too strong, but because they were too strange to process through standard military doctrine. The humans were teaching the galaxy's greatest military machine that there was more than one way to be warriors, and the lesson was becoming very uncomfortable for everyone involved. 6 months into what should have been a 3-day operation, the Galactic Hegemony faced something that had never appeared in any of their historical records: complete systematic failure against a species that refused to follow any recognizable rules of warfare, diplomacy, or common sense. Admiral Kexathera, now demoted to Senior Operations Coordinator after 2 formal reprimands for gross procedural incompetence, stood in what had once been her command center. The pristine bridge of the Orderly Progress now looked like the aftermath of a very strange hurricane. Half the screens displayed error messages in languages that shouldn't exist. The other half showed human social media feeds that somehow broadcast continuously through their secured military networks. "Status report," she said wearily to her remaining staff. Lieutenant Vextel consulted his tablet, though he'd learned to expect the impossible. "The humans have escalated their resistance activities. They're calling it Operation Paperweight." "What does that mean?" "They've begun filing formal complaints about our invasion." Kexthera blinked in confusion. "What kind of complaints?" "All kinds," Vextal replied, scrolling through what appeared to be thousands of documents. "Noise violations for our engine sounds, environmental impact concerns about our landing sites, parking citations for unauthorized orbital presence, and approximately 4 million individual requests for our proper business licenses." On Earth, the operation had started as a joke in a coffee shop in Portland, Oregon. Barista Amy Chen was complaining about the aliens to her regular customers when local accountant Frank Morrison made an observation that changed everything. "You know," he said, stirring his coffee thoughtfully, "technically speaking, these aliens are operating without permits. They're conducting business on Earth without filing proper paperwork with any government agency." Within hours, Amy had posted the idea online. "If these aliens want to conquer us bureaucratically, let's give them bureaucracy." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Humans around the world began treating the invasion like the world's largest permit violation. Environmental. Lawyers filed injunctions against orbital bombardment without proper environmental impact studies. City planners demanded that alien landing sites comply with local zoning regulations. Health inspectors insisted on examining alien food storage facilities. Fire marshals wanted to review evacuation procedures for alien vessels. But the real genius was in the execution. Every form was filled out incorrectly on purpose, but just incorrectly enough to require review rather than immediate rejection. Humans had turned malicious compliance into an art form. A construction worker in Detroit submitted a complaint that alien landing craft were operating heavy machinery without proper safety certifications, but he filed it in crayon and included a drawing of his cat. The form was legally valid but practically impossible to process seriously. A kindergarten teacher in Mumbai filed environmental concerns about alien emissions, but wrote her entire complaint in the form of a children's story about space dragons who forgot to say please. The legal points were actually sound, but they were buried in enough whimsical language to break any automated processing system. The Hegemony's administrative computers, designed to handle the orderly integration of civilized species, couldn't cope with millions of humans who understood bureaucracy just well enough to weaponize it. Every response the aliens sent generated 10 new forms. Every clarification request spawned dozens of additional complaints. War Administrator Zekmoth had given up trying to fight a conventional war. His forces were spending more time responding to permit applications than engaging in combat operations. He'd received formal requests to submit his battle plans for environmental review, safety inspections for his weapons, and business licenses for conducting military operations on sovereign territory. "They've turned our own systems against us," he reported to High Command during a secure transmission that was interrupted 6 times by humans asking if he needed technical support. "Every time we try to operate according to proper procedure, they bury us in more procedures." The situation became truly surreal when 3 alien units actually defected. It started when Corporal Thiven of the Hegemony Marines got lost during a patrol in New Orleans. A local jazz musician named Marcus found him wandering around the French Quarter, assumed he was a tourist in an elaborate costume, and invited him to grab dinner at a local restaurant. 2 hours later, Thiven was sitting in a dive bar listening to live music while eating something called jambalaya and learning about human concepts like spontaneous fun and meals that aren't nutritionally optimized. When his unit found him 6 hours later, he didn't want to leave. But the food tastes good for reasons that serve no purpose, he tried to explain to his commanding officer. And the music makes sounds that create emotional responses that don't contribute to efficiency. It's completely irrational and somehow very satisfying. Similar incidents occurred in Italy, where an alien reconnaissance team was adopted by a grandmother who refused to let them leave without trying her homemade pasta, and in Japan, where a Hegemony engineer spent an entire day learning to fold origami from children in a park and forgot to report back to his ship. The cultural contamination was spreading through alien ranks. Hegemony personnel were requesting shore leave to try human food, asking for language lessons to better understand human entertainment, and filing official complaints about the nutritional adequacy of standard Hegemony rations compared to something called pizza. Bureaucrat General Thyssima found herself in the unprecedented position of having to send psychological evaluation teams to treat alien soldiers who were showing symptoms of what human doctors had diagnosed as acute curiosity syndrome and chronic appreciation disorder. "They're not defeated," she reported to the Hegemony High Council. "They're not even properly conquered. They're just infecting us with their approach to existence. Half my staff has requested extended cultural research assignments. My chief communications officer has learned to play something called a harmonica and insists on performing during staff meetings." The final straw came when humans launched what they called the Friendship Offensive. Instead of fighting the aliens, cities around the world began hosting cultural exchange events specifically for Hegemony personnel. The invitations were formally written and properly submitted through official channels, which meant the aliens were required to respond according to their own protocols. Dallas organized an alien appreciation barbecue. Mumbai hosted a Bollywood dance lesson for confused Hegemony Marines. Edinburgh offered guided tours of local whiskey distilleries. Rio arranged beach volleyball games that somehow resulted in alien officers learning to samba. Each event was technically a diplomatic function, which meant attendance was mandatory for designated Hegemony cultural liaison officers. But the humans had ensured that every liaison officer would have a genuinely good time, meet interesting people, and experience things that had no equivalent in Hegemony culture. The breaking point came when Admiral Kexathera received a formal invitation to address the United Nations. The invitation was written in perfect diplomatic language, submitted through proper channels, and included all necessary security arrangements. According to Hegemony protocol, she was required to accept. The speech was scheduled for 3 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. By 3:15, Kexithera was on stage in the UN General Assembly, trying to explain hegemony integration procedures to an audience of human diplomats who kept asking questions like, "But what if we don't want to be more efficient?" And, "Have you considered that some of us actually enjoy our chaotic governmental systems?" The session was broadcast live around the world, and by the time it ended, Ask the Aliens was trending on social media with millions of humans submitting questions about alien culture, technology, and whether they'd like to try various local foods. That evening, Kexithera filed a formal request with Hegemony High Command for immediate reassignment to any post that didn't involve humans. Her report included a recommendation that Earth be classified as a quarantine zone, not for biological containment, but for acute mimetic hazard with potential for systematic psychological disruption of hegemony personnel. For the first time in galactic history, an entire species had managed to defeat a superior military force not through violence or clever tactics, but by being so relentlessly, creatively, and cheerfully themselves that the invaders could no longer remember why they'd wanted to conquer anyone in the first place. The humans had broken more than just the hegemony's invasion plans. They'd broken the entire conceptual framework that the galaxy used to understand how civilized species were supposed to behave. And somehow, in the process, they'd made it look like the most fun anyone had ever had while accidentally ending an interstellar war. The emergency session of the Hegemony High Council took place in the most secure chamber on the capital world of Centralis, where the galaxy's greatest administrative minds gathered to address what their files now classified as the Earth problem. Chancellor Mordak, an ancient Tetherian whose species had founded the hegemony 3 millennia ago, reviewed the final reports from the Sol system with growing disbelief. His crystalline features remained expressionless, but the subtle color changes in his skin revealed deep confusion. "Let me understand this correctly," he said to the assembled council. "Our forces were not defeated in battle. They were not driven away by superior technology. They were not even properly resisted according to any recognizable military doctrine." "That is correct, Chancellor," replied Admiral Kexithera, who had been summoned to give testimony about her spectacular failure. "The humans made it impossible for us to continue operations by making our personnel no longer wish to continue operations." "Explain." Kexithera gestured to a holographic display showing data from the final months of the occupation. 60% of our ground forces requested extended cultural research assignments. 40% filed formal complaints about returning to standard hegemony nutrition after experiencing human food. 23% submitted applications for permanent residency on Earth, and 12%, well, they went native entirely and are currently operating food trucks in various human cities. The council chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of the translation devices struggling to process concepts that had no equivalent in most galactic languages. War Administrator Zekmoth stepped forward to add his report. "The humans didn't fight us so much as absorb us. Every tactical advantage we possessed became irrelevant because they refused to engage on terms we could understand. They turned our occupation into, I believe the human term is hanging out." "Hanging out?" Chancellor Mordak's skin shifted to a pale purple, indicating maximum confusion. "Social interaction without specific objectives or measurable outcomes," Bureaucrat General Thissima explained, reading from her cultural analysis report. "Humans engage in this behavior regularly. They appear to enjoy spending time together for no purpose beyond mutual companionship. Our psychological teams initially classified it as a form of mental illness, but further study suggests it may be their default social state." The Council's chief psychologist, Dr. Velnaris, had been studying human behavior for months. Her report was the most disturbing document in hegemony history, not because it described violence or chaos, but because it described a species that seemed genuinely happy with their inefficient existence. Humans appear to value individual expression over systematic efficiency, she said. They create art with no practical purpose. They play games with no productive outcomes. They form emotional attachments that serve no biological or economic function. Most troubling of all, they seem to actively enjoy these behaviors. But surely, interrupted Counselor Thexvom, they must have some form of hierarchical structure, some system of control that maintains social order. They do, Dr. Velnaris replied. Multiple overlapping systems, in fact. But they also have what they call democracy, which means their leaders are chosen through a process that resembles organized chaos. And somehow, despite constant disagreement about everything, they manage to coordinate responses to external threats more effectively than our most sophisticated command structures. The psychological implications were staggering. The hegemony's entire social model was based on the assumption that intelligent species naturally evolved toward efficient, centralized systems. Humans suggested that the opposite might also work. Chancellor Mordak called for a recess, during which the Council's Emergency Planning Committee tried to determine how to classify a species that didn't fit any existing categories. They weren't primitive. Their technology was advancing rapidly. They weren't hostile. They'd been remarkably friendly to individual hegemony personnel. They weren't unified, but their lack of unity somehow made them stronger rather than weaker. When the session resumed, the Chancellor announced the Council's unprecedented decision. The system designated Sol is hereby classified as Quarantine Zone Sigma 7, Extreme Procedural Hazard. All hegemony vessels are prohibited from entering the system without explicit Council authorization and mandatory psychological screening. The official reason was diplomatic. The species designated human demonstrates incompatible social structures that pose a contamination risk to hegemony operational procedures. The unofficial reason was simpler. Nobody could figure out how to conquer beings who treated conquest like a social event and somehow made their would-be conquerors enjoy themselves. In the process, 3 years later, the quarantine had become the galaxy's worst-kept secret. Despite official prohibitions, Earth had become the most popular unauthorized tourist destination in known space. The Hegemony Space Tourism Authority reported a 300% increase in equipment malfunctions and navigation errors that resulted in ships accidentally visiting the Sol system. Young aliens would take their standard military service assignments, then mysteriously develop technical problems that forced them to make emergency landings on Earth. They would return weeks later with strange new perspectives, collections of human music, and inexplicable cravings for foods that shouldn't appeal to their biology. The black market in Earth experiences had become so widespread that the hegemony finally established official diplomatic contact, if only to regulate the traffic that was going to happen anyway. Ambassador Kexathera, promoted back to her original rank after her failure was recontextualized as successful cultural reconnaissance, found herself stationed at the new Hegemony Embassy in Geneva. Her job was officially to monitor human technological development and ensure they didn't pose a threat to galactic stability. Her actual job was to process visa applications from aliens who wanted to visit Earth, conduct cultural exchange programs, and occasionally translate when human diplomats submitted treaty proposals written on napkins from local restaurants. The most successful diplomatic breakthrough came when Ambassador Kexathera attended a dinner party at the home of Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, the physicist who had first analyzed alien weapons technology. Over wine and homemade lasagna, they hammered out the framework for what became known as the Geneva Accords on Interstellar Tourism. "The thing is," Dr. Hayes had said while refilling the ambassador's glass, "you aliens keep trying to understand us like we're a problem to be solved. But we're not a problem. We're just people. Complicated, messy, creative people who like to try new things and make friends with strangers." The Accords established Earth as a cultural exchange zone, where aliens could visit freely as long as they respected local laws and customs. In return, humans gained access to hegemony educational programs, scientific databases, and carefully monitored cultural exchange opportunities. The arrangement worked better than anyone expected. Human musicians started performing fusion concerts with alien instruments. Alien scientists collaborated with human researchers on projects that neither species could have imagined alone. The galaxy's first interspecies food truck festival drew visitors from 12 different star systems and accidentally invented 17 new art forms. 5 years after the failed invasion, bureaucrat General Thisma published her memoir, How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Chaos, a guide to human integration. It became required reading at the Hegemony Military Academy, not as a manual for conquest, but as a case study in alternative approaches to interspecies relations. The book's conclusion summarized what had become the new galactic consensus on humanity. The species designated human represents a fundamental paradigm shift in our understanding of intelligent civilization. They have demonstrated that chaos and efficiency are not mutually exclusive, that individual freedom and collective action can coexist, and that the most effective form of diplomacy may simply be inviting your neighbors over for dinner. They did not defeat the hegemony through superior firepower or advanced technology. They defeated us by making us realize that defeat and victory were the wrong words entirely. They taught us that the universe had room for more than one way of being intelligent. And perhaps most importantly, they showed us that civilization doesn't have to be serious all the time. Sometimes the best response to an overwhelming challenge is to laugh, make friends, and see what happens next. The final line of her memoir became the unofficial motto of the new era of galactic relations. The hegemony learned that day that the universe had two types of intelligent species, those who followed protocols and humans. We were not prepared for humans. But maybe in the end, the universe wasn't prepared for any of us to stay the same forever. Earth remained officially quarantined, but it was the kind of quarantine that everyone wanted to catch. And across the galaxy, species that had never questioned their efficient, orderly existence began to wonder what it might be like to try something new, something spontaneous, something that served no purpose except the joy of doing it. The humans had accidentally started a revolution, and they'd done it by being exactly who they already were. In the end, perhaps that was the most human thing of all.